Very much. Thank you, John, for that kind intro, and also thank you to the organisers for giving me the opportunity to present to you guys today. As mentioned, I'm Dr. Oakley Cox. I'm the Director of Analysis at Cambridge, our headquarters for Darktrace, just up the road, or up the railway line in my case. And I'm going to talk to you today about fast and furious attacks, so the modern threat landscape, how these threats have the capacity to overwhelm human security teams with both their speed and their potential intended level of disruption, and how we can leverage AI tools to not just respond to those threats, but also do that in a surgical way, such that you minimize the disruption to business continuity. So before I jump into that, I'm going to talk a little bit about Darktrace. We were founded in 2013 here in the UK, using mathematicians from the University of Cambridge to take AI technology and apply it to the problem of cybersecurity. Since then, we've grown tremendously. I joined in 2017 as we went through our first growth phase. Last year, we listed on the London Stock Exchange, and using the funds that generated, we were able to grow our R&D team. Oh, it's back, okay. Grow our R&D team by over 50% and our core development team by 100%. As you can see, we've got thousands of customers, global footprint, over 100 countries, and across all industry sectors. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the threat landscape. This is kind of picked up across our global customer base from the last year or so. The first one there, when I made this slide a month or so ago, geopolitical cyber conflict was still very much tensions, and sadly that has now become very real. And I don't mean to use this point to diminish the real physical damage and loss of life that's happening in Eastern Europe at the moment. But I think it's also important to reflect on the fact there is a cyber dimension to what is happening at the moment. We know, for example, that there is a strain of malware called Hermetic Wiper that is currently connected to the invasion in Ukraine. It works similar to ransomware, but instead of encrypting the data in order to then leverage for financial gain, it is simply wiping that data completely. At the moment, that appears to be mainly targeting Ukrainian government institutions and related, so it's not spreading out. But we also know that there is a risk of an escalation where it becomes a tit-for-tat targeting of cyber attacks against things like critical infrastructure in the West and in Russia. And I think as part of that, a perhaps more realistic outcome is the idea of a cyber conflict that targets a region or a country and then spreads. So for example, we have already seen this happen. In 2017, the NotPetya ransomware event, which was a follow-on a few months after WannaCry, was an incident that targeted Ukrainian institutions, and due to the way it was designed, it spread out beyond Ukrainian borders and took down multinational countries such as Maersk and Merck, and caused a huge amount of disruption and financial damage. This is the kind of thing that in my opinion, I think is more likely to be a realistic reality of a kind of cyber warfare event. The second thing is, from the last, 2 years or so, is the rise of supply chain. Supply chain is something that every organization is taking into account in their risk. These events that I've highlighted here, SolarWinds, Kaseya, Log4j, highlight how that supply chain has come into cyber. Now, what's interesting about these three is firstly how different they are, but also the similarities between them. SolarWinds was a nation state, or supposedly nation state. Kaseya was criminal activity, criminal gangs, and Log4j was a vulnerability in underlying software that's used by a lot of other companies. So quite different backgrounds. And yet the similarity is they are used by a wide number of organizations across the world. The incidents that followed on from them were quick moving. So for example, Kaseya, the Kaseya software was used to deploy ransomware on the 4th of July weekend, on a Friday afternoon, late in the day at high speed. Log4j, when that was announced for some reason on a Friday, I don't know why they choose to publish these vulnerabilities on a Friday, but they did. Within hours, we saw attempts by criminal gangs to leverage that vulnerability, initially to mine cryptocurrency, and then within a few days, weeks, attempts to leverage that vulnerability to deploy ransomware. The next one is insider threat. This is something that's been talked about plenty before, but we're currently going through this so-called great resignation, the idea that people are moving, people might be more disgruntled, but also the accidental, as people come used to using cloud, work from home, how they use that data, where is that data, how are they using it? And then finally, the big topic of the last 12 months, ransomware. We know criminal gangs are continuing to evolve. This ransomware as a service business model that they have developed as gangs is proving incredibly resilient to law enforcement, and at the same time, they're developing their tools, techniques, and procedures to keep up or stay ahead even of industry trends. So for example, organizations have become good at, we need backups. That's our way to recover from ransomware. Well, during that dwell time, so that's that time between compromise and the destination of ransomware, attackers will now intentionally look for those backup servers and encrypt those first as a way of maximizing disruption. So how have we got to this state? So one of the things that the industry has done historically to deal with cyber attacks is this what I would term a rear-view mirror technique. So it is relying on previous knowledge of attacks in order to build up their playbooks. So rules and signatures and playbooks. Now, some of these tools are incredibly powerful. You think of zero trust architecture, where you build up your rules and your playbooks. That I would say they are integral to the way businesses should be doing cybersecurity, but they're always retrospective. They lack visibility and they lack context of new attacks. The second thing about these rules and playbooks as well is that they are incredibly human resource intensive to first build and secondly maintain. So you've got a situation where you are spending a lot of time and you still can't see potentially can't see what the next attack coming is because you are merely mitigating against previous attacks. So what is the solution to this problem we have? We like to use the phrase autonomous response as a concept of a way of going about this. So what is autonomous response? It is the idea of having a central AI brain that understands your organization. It's not there to understand other organizations. It understands your organization and what is normal for your business and the way you operate. Once it has this understanding, it can identify what is unusual. It doesn't know necessarily why it is unusual. You don't have to tell it that IP address, that host name is bad. This is a particular attacker. It knows it's unusual, and it can take precise action to stop that attack in its tracks. Because it knows what's normal, it can take a device, know that's normal, and allow that to continue while blocking and preventing the unusual activity around it. So therefore, it's minimizing the disruption to the business. And it can do this not just on physical devices, but across a whole digital estate. So email, cloud, SaaS, network, operational technology, industrial control systems. This is the kind of our concept of autonomous response. So what does that look like from a Darktrace lens? So first I'll do a little bit of background about how we build up our security platform. So at the center of it all, we have our self-learning brain, where we take data from across a digital estate and we build up this understanding of self, or the AI builds up this understanding of self. Once you have that, you can pick up unusual activity to detect unusual events and respond to unusual events. Wrapped around that, you have an investigation piece. This is really important because a lot of AI tools are often perceived or are as black boxes, where it tells you this is unusual, do something about it, but you don't have a context of why or what it means. So that investigation piece is leveraging the AI in order to communicate with the security teams. Why is this important? What is it likely to represent? What is the background and the context of this particular event? What that then allows is that integration, not only with this human security team, but also with other technologies. So it can sit alongside a security stack in order, firstly, to gather its data, and secondly, to take its response. So our particular, obviously the one of interest here is that response piece. So our particular product that does that is called Darktrace Antigena, Autonomous Response. And as I said, it can sit across a whole digital estate: email, network, cloud, SaaS, endpoint, operational technology, IoT, etc. It takes data from those, as I said before, and then it is able to integrate to then take the response. So for example, if an email is unusual, contains an unusual link or an unusual attachment, it can lock that link, strip that attachment. If a user is logged in from somewhere unusual, can you disable that user account, an Office 365 account? Or can you temporarily disable them from certain locations so that user can still log in from the office, but you're preventing that potentially malicious compromise from another location? On the network, if a device starts behaving unusually, can you prevent certain connections by integrating with firewalls or integrating with endpoint pieces such as Windows Defender to prevent those connections from continuing, but those specific connections that are unusual? So as an example for this is kind of a timeline. This is a made-up attack. I am going to go through a real-world example in a second. But here we've got a case of a user accidentally, maybe they click on an email link or whatever it may be, they accidentally download a suspicious file from of an unknown malware, previously no signatures, unknown website. Darktrace is able to take reaction to block that download while allowing the user to still continue with their usual, connecting internally to file servers, connecting to the cloud, whatever it may be. Now, if the attack continues, and I think this is really important, I don't know why the attack may continue, but if you take the assumption that we can block it there, that completely floors the whole approach that we're taking. The cybersecurity industry has gone down this preventative route, and then that's the full assumption that, if we prevent it, we'll be fine. We need to have a layered security. So what if the attack continues? What if the attacker finds a way around that? What if the file is downloaded in a way or installed in a way that isn't detectable by Darktrace? What do we do next? Well, now the malware will start performing its command and control communications to rare endpoints. So it's trying to signal to websites around the world that it hasn't previously connected with. Can we block those connections? Antigena will do so. And then finally, maybe the attacker reaches their goal for whatever reason. They try to upload a large amount of data. They might even leverage a legitimate service, such as OneDrive, a cloud storage platform. This pattern of behavior is unusual. Block that connection, block that upload, block the loss of sensitive data. So here's an example from 2020 of the Sodinokibi ransomware strain, which was leveraged by the R-Evil criminal gang. Here we have an incident where the customer wasn't leveraging autonomous response. They had Darktrace in detect mode. So we can see the full attack chain, but we also know how Darktrace, if they had been using the autonomous response, could have taken action at each point. So we see this initial compromise where the attacker managed to get hold of IT credentials and was able to compromise a domain controller. From there, it instantly uploaded a small amount of data to a rare endpoint. Previously, no open source intelligence knew that this was a malicious endpoint. A small amount of data that contained things like, what operating system, what the neighboring device is, information that the attacker would find useful to carry on. You then see the establishment of command and control. You then see the attempt to perform that internal reconnaissance to know where they are in the network, more about neighboring devices, where the crown jewel files are, all of that kind of stuff. And then once it knows that, it can perform its lateral movement. Now, notice the timeline here. The dwell time is weeks. The attacker, without a detection piece like Darktrace, can stay there undetected, moving about, performing its business. Now, these dwell times, at the time this dwell time was typical, that seems to be shortening in our experience down to days rather than weeks. But it is still a period of time in which unusual behaviors are being performed. So the lateral movement is an interesting one because this is where they leveraged those tools that already existed on the network, were already being used legitimately by the admin, but were leveraging them in an unusual way. So there is a tool on Windows called PSExec, which allows administrators to perform remote administration. The attacker leveraged that to compromise further devices. Once it had done that, it was able to perform its data exfiltration, and finally, on the 12th of October, deploy the ransomware across the wider digital estate. And you can see they actually carried on even after the deployment of ransomware to exfiltrate data. Now, at each stage of this, well, firstly, if the detection piece was there, so if they had been checking Darktrace, they would have been able to spot it and the humans respond, but if they'd been using autonomous response, they wouldn't have even required the input of the humans. It would have blocked it as it progressed. So I'm conscious of time, but I just want to. One of the things we find with organizations is this confidence in using AI, the ethics of using AI within their organization, the confidence of taking the reins from a human team and putting it in a tool. So I just want to talk through this maturity model that we see organizations go through. The first is they put it in passive mode. So Antigena recommends the responses, but it doesn't take it. So they understand what it is likely to do. They then put it in human confirmation mode, so it recommends it, sends an alert to a phone or an email, and the human analyst confirms that it wants it to do it. Then maybe they want to do it in autonomous response because they've built up that trust. So, for example, if you're a London-based organization, weekends and nights you don't have the security staff to take 24-hour, 7-day-a-week coverage. So in out of hours, autonomous response. In normal hours, human response. So yeah, very much tailored to a business requirement, the size of the security team, your use case. So the last thing I want to end on is that this isn't some kind of next-generation tool, some kind of experimental or brand-new, untested tool. This is being leveraged by organizations all around the world as part of a wider security stack. I guess I will be hanging around here for most of the rest of the day. My colleagues are already downstairs, so please do, if you're interested, come up, have a chat. I'm more than happy to answer any questions or if you've got any thoughts on my presentation. So thank you very much.